The snow fell like soft knives in the dark alleyways of Outpost 9. Cold wind howled through broken metal walls and empty streets. Most people were sleeping, hiding from the deadly chill outside. But one man walked slowly, carrying a warm box of food in his arms. His name was Jaren, a human mechanic who fixed broken ships and gave food to the forgotten. He turned a corner, and what he saw made him stop. A woman stood in the snow, shaking, her arms wrapped around a small child. The woman was not human. Her skin was pale blue, her hair white like ash. She was barefoot, her clothes torn and thin. Her eyes full of fear and pain, the child in her. Arms was small, too small, wrapped in rags. Her feet hung out from the bottom. Jaren saw the color. Her tiny feet were purple, turning dark. Frostbite, she wouldn't last the night. The woman looked up at Jaren as he stepped closer. She did not. Run did not beg, but her lips trembled as she spoke. Please. Just one hot meal for my daughter, she whispered. I'll be yours tonight. Anything you want. Just feed her. Jaren's breath caught in his throat. He looked at the child again, her head resting weakly on the woman's chest, eyes half closed, lips cracked. She was dying slowly, quietly, like a candle without air. He wanted to speak, but said nothing. Instead, he took off his coat and wrapped it around the child. The woman's eyes widened in shock. Jaren didn't stop. He turned, began walking away, then looked back over his shoulder. Well, come on, he said. The woman hesitated, then followed. Holding the child close, the snow swallowed their footprints as they walked through narrow alleys. Back to Jaren's small metal shelter near Dock 4. Inside, it was warm, filled with a soft hum of heaters and the smell of cooked meat. Jaren placed the food on the table, opened the blanket near the fire. Put her there, he said. The woman carefully laid the child down. Her hands were shaking, her breath shallow from the cold. Jaren didn't ask her name. Not yet. He grabbed extra blankets, wrapped the child tight, and handed the woman a cup of warm broth. She held it but didn't drink. I said I'll give myself to you, she said softly. That was the deal. Jaren looked at her, frowning. You made no deal with me, he replied. You made a request. I answered it. But why? She asked, confused, because no child should freeze to death while people have heat and food. He said. She stared at him as if he was something unreal, then slowly drank the broth, her eyes never leaving his face. Jaren knelt beside the child, checked her tiny feet, still purple, but warming slowly. He applied a heating gel, wrapped them gently. What's her name? He asked. Leary, the woman said, barely above a whisper. And yours? Thiraka. Jaren nodded. Well, Thiraka, she's safe here. He said, you both are. A small sound escaped from Leary's mouth, weak sigh. She moved slightly under the blankets. Thiraka gasped and knelt beside her. She's still alive, she whispered, holding her daughter's face in her hands. Thank the stars, she's still alive. Jaren stood, moved to the stove, and prepared another hot meal. He placed a plate in front of Thiraka and said, eat, no one's going to hurt you here. Thiraka sat slowly, still unsure if this was real, as she ate. Her eyes filled with tears she had held back for days. She had begged, sold her pride, offered her body, yet no one had helped until this man, this human, who asked for nothing in return. She looked around the small home, simple but warm, clean and safe. A single light hung from the ceiling, tools lined the walls, and a soft bed stood in the corner. It wasn't luxury, but it was heaven compared to the cold outside. For the first time in many nights, she felt something she had forgotten. Hope. But outside, in the shadows, a small drone floated silently. Its red eye focused on the woman and child inside. It had seen everything, and it sent the footage back to someone. very dangerous. Someone who believed Thiaka and her child still belonged to him. The wind outside grew stronger, and the warmth inside the shelter was not enough to stop what was coming next, but for one night. A mother held her daughter close, and a stranger gave them a chance to survive, and maybe, just maybe, a reason to fight for tomorrow. Asterisk, the small metal shelter was silent except for the sound of the fire crackling and the child. Breathing softly under layers of blankets, Jaren sat at the edge of the room, watching, waiting, thinking. Thiaka sat beside her daughter, one hand holding the girl's tiny fingers, the other clutching the blanket close. She had eaten slowly, carefully, like she hadn't touched warm food in days. Her eyes were no longer just scared. They were watching him, too. Measuring him, Jaren spoke first. "You don't have to stay silent, you know," he said. Thiaka didn't look up at him, but her voice came, low and tired. "Silence kept us alive this long." Jaren leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Well, this place doesn't kill for noise." He said, "You're safe here." She finally looked up, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "Safe is not a word I believe anymore." Jaren said nothing after that. He respected silence when it was needed. Instead, he stood and checked. The small window, the snow was still falling, thick and heavy, covering all tracks. Good. But he didn't see the small black drone. Floating just above the alley wall, its lens still glowing red, recording everything in the early hours. Lyri, the child, stirred again. Her little hand gripped Thiaka's thumb, and the alien woman gasped softly. "She's stronger," she said, a tear falling down her cheek. "She's coming back." Jaren smiled slightly, but his eyes were serious. "How long were you both out there?" he asked. Thiaka hesitated, then answered, 4 days, maybe 5. "I lost track after she stopped crying." She looked down at her daughter, voice shaking. "I tried to trade work for food, begged, even offered myself, but they all pushed me away." Jaren felt anger stir inside him. He had seen that cruelty before. In war zones, in refugee camps, on forgotten colonies, but this was worse. It was here. In a place where people had warmth and still chose to ignore. He stood up again, walked to the stove, and pulled out more food from storage. "You and your daughter eat as much as you need," he said firmly. "No deals, no prices." Thiaka didn't speak, but her eyes softened. She picked up the spoon slowly, fed the warm soup into her daughter's mouth drop by drop. Lyri coughed weakly, but swallowed, a small miracle in a dying world, but across the city. In a tall black tower near the spaceport, the warlord's eyes narrowed. He watched the video feed from the drone, saw Thiaka alive, saw her child still breathing. His voice growled through sharp teeth. "Find them," he ordered. "Kill the man. And bring the woman and the child back to me." His soldier nodded and vanished. The hunt had begun. Back in the shelter, Jaren finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Who's looking for you?" Thiaka paused, then stood, walked to the other side of the room. She reached under her ragged shirt and pulled out a metal band wrapped around her wrist. A brand, it had a number, a barcode, and a symbol burned into the skin. "Property of Vorak Syndicate," it read. Jaren felt sick. "You were a slave?" he asked. Thiaka nodded. "A breeder," she said softly, "for his army, for his line, until Lyri was born sick. Slow to grow. Not strong enough. They said she was broken and left us to die." Jaren clenched his fists. He had heard of the Vorak Syndicate. They controlled ships, planets, people, and they didn't forgive disobedience. Helping Thiaka meant one thing: trouble, deadly trouble, still. He looked at the sleeping child and then back at the woman. "They're going to come," he said. Thiaka didn't deny it. She simply said, "Yes." "But I'm not giving you up," Jaren added, voice hard like steel. "I don't care who they are." Thiaka stared at him, her lips slightly parted, in her entire life. No one had ever said that to her. No one had chosen her side, until now. But outside, footsteps were already approaching the alley. A dark shape moved through the snow, slow and heavy. And it stopped just outside the shelter. The door shook slightly. Jaren moved fast, picked up his old rifle, loaded it, and stood. In front of Tharaka and Leary, then came the knock. 3 slow knocks, and a voice, cold and sharp. "We know she's inside. Return the slave and the child, or we take the whole building." Jaren didn't move, didn't blink. He raised the weapon. Tharaka stood beside him, no longer shaking. "She's not a slave," Jaren said loudly. "Not anymore." There was silence. Then the door shook harder. The first attack had begun, but so had the resistance. And it all started with one hot meal. The first attack didn't break the door, but it broke the silence inside. Jaren stood with his rifle ready, his back against the wall, eyes locked on the shaking door. Tharaka placed Leary gently behind a pile of blankets, her hands steady now, her eyes sharp like a blade. The child slept through the noise, her breathing shallow but steady. Warmth had returned to her tiny limbs, but danger still wrapped the air like a cold shadow. "They won't stop," Tharaka said quietly. "They don't stop until they get what they want." Jaren looked at her and asked, "Then tell me everything. All of it." "Before we fight more of them," Tharaka took a long breath, sat down beside the heater, and spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was a storm buried in every word. "I wasn't always like this," she said. "I was born in a breeding center on Zalith 5, raised for one purpose, to produce strong offspring for the Vorak Syndicate." She looked down at the mark on her wrist, the metal that branded her as property. "I never chose my mates, never chose my name. Tharaka was given to me by a caretaker. It means quiet one." Jaren listened, silent. He didn't interrupt. "Even when his heart boiled with anger, they tested us every day," she continued. "Strength, speed, obedience. If you failed, they took you away. I passed. Until I fell in love with a guard." Her eyes went distant for a moment. "He was kind at first," she whispered. "But love isn't allowed for breeders. When Leary was born, they found she wasn't perfect, her body weak, her growth slow. They called her a defect." Jaren clenched his jaw. "What did they do?" "They told me to leave her outside, to let her die in the frost." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I couldn't. I wrapped her in my arms and ran." Jaren said nothing, just tightened the grip on his rifle. He knew now this woman didn't just carry pain. She carried defiance. She carried love so strong it broke chains. "They sent hunters after me," Tharaka went on, "and I ran from planet to planet, begging, hiding, trading myself for food. Just to keep her alive." She looked toward the blankets where Leary slept. "She's all I have." Outside, the steps faded for a while. Jaren took the moment to ask, "How did they find you here?" No one knew. Tharaka pointed to a crack in the wall where a faint red light blinked. "A drone. They use them to track all their marked property." "I didn't see it." Jaren walked over, smashed the drone with a tool, and kicked the broken pieces aside. "No more watching," he said. "But they already know where we are." Tharaka nodded slowly. "They'll come with more, stronger ones," she said. "Next time, they won't knock." Jaren moved to the corner of the room, pulled up a metal hatch from the floor. Inside was a hidden box covered in dust. He opened it and pulled out a thick black device, military grade. "Old Earth tech." "What is that?" Tharaka asked, surprised. "Distress beacon," Jaren said. "Old signal. Coded to reach Earth ships, if any are listening." He looked at her. "But Earth pulled out of this sector years ago. I don't know if anyone will hear it." "Still worth trying," she replied. "Because, if they don't come, we die." Jaren nodded and activated the beacon. A soft pulse blinked blue, then green, The signal was out. Now all they could do was wait and prepare. He handed Therica a small blaster from his wall. "Can you use this?" She checked it quickly. Her fingers moving with memory, not fear. "I used to train with guards. Until I wasn't allowed anymore, I can fight," she said. Her voice strong. Jaren almost smiled. "Good, 'cause I can't win this alone." They began preparing the shelter for another fight. Jaren sealed the windows, reinforced the door, and placed traps in the hallway. Therica cleaned the weapons and checked the escape route under the floor. Okay. Every moment was heavy, not just with fear but with something new. Trust. For the first time, Therica wasn't running alone. And for the first time, Jaren was fighting for something more than survival. He was fighting for a child who reminded him what innocence looked like. For a mother who had never known safety outside. More ships landed silently on the far side of the outpost. Dark figures moved through the snow. Weapons in hand, the warlord wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to take back what he believed was his. But inside the shelter, something had already changed. Therica was no longer prey. Jaren was no longer alone. And Leary, once dying in the snow, was now surrounded by fire, love, and rage. The Syndicate thought they were hunting a runaway slave, but what they had truly found was the beginning of their own downfall. The snowstorm outside howled like a wild beast, but inside the shelter, everything was still. Therica sat near the door with the blaster resting across her lap. Jaren checked the power cells in his old rifle, loading it like his hands had done it 1,000 times before. Leary slept quietly, her chest rising and falling, her small hand clutching the edge of the blanket. Warmth had returned to her cheeks, and a soft color bloomed under her skin again. But the danger outside had only grown darker. "They'll come soon," Therica said, not as a warning, but as a fact. Jaren nodded. Tightening the seal on the door, "I've locked every entrance, but if they blast it, we'll need to hold them off here." Therica stood, her back straight now, her eyes clear. She was no longer just a frightened mother, she was becoming a soldier. "I don't care if I die," she said, "but they won't take her again." Jaren looked at her for a long second. "You're not going to die," he said. "Not today." Then came the sound they were waiting for, a low hum, like engines drawing close. Then shadows moving past the window, dark, armored figures surrounding the shelter. Jaren held his breath, counting steps. He heard voices outside, speaking in rough, alien tongue. Then something slammed into the door boom. Once, twice. The metal groaned, but held. Therica raised her blaster, aimed it toward the door. Jaren whispered, "When the third hit comes, shoot to kill." Boom! The third impact exploded the lock, and the door burst open. Smoke filled the room, and shadows rushed in. But Therica moved faster. She fired 3 shots clean. Fast, deadly. 2 invaders dropped instantly. Jaren followed with a burst from his rifle. Hitting one in the chest, the room shook with chaos. Light, smoke, and sound. But they fought like they were born for this moment. Therica moved to protect Leary's corner, never leaving the child's side. Jaren covered her from the front, drawing enemy fire. They weren't just defending a shelter. They were defending a promise. Jaren shouted, "Fall back to the kitchen. I'll block the hall." Therica grabbed the child, still wrapped in blankets, and ran to the back room. Jaren pulled a metal shelf down, blocking the attackers as more grenades hit the walls. Sparks flew, pipes burst, but the shelter still stood inside the kitchen. Therica laid Leary behind the old oven, using broken furniture to shield her. Then she turned, sweat on her face, fury in her eyes. And when one of the soldiers tried to enter, she didn't hesitate. She shot him point blank for her daughter. She would burn the galaxy. Jaren joined her seconds later, coughing through the smoke. "I counted 7 total," he said. "I got 3, you got 3. Therica smirked. Then one is still breathing. She was right. One of the soldiers, wounded, dragged himself near the door. Jaren moved fast, pinned him with a boot to the chest. Rifle aimed. Who sent you? He demanded. The alien spat blood, eyes burning. You have no idea. What you've done, her life belongs to the warlord. Jaren didn't hesitate. He knocked the soldier out cold and dragged him outside into the snow. Let the storm take him inside. The shelter was a wreck, broken walls, smoke-stained ceiling, shattered glass, but it had held. And they were still alive. Tharaka sank to her knees, holding Leary tight again. The child opened her eyes for a moment, weak but alive. Mama. Is it warm now? She whispered. Tharaka smiled through tears. Yes, baby, it's warm now. Jaren sat down beside them, his rifle resting beside his leg. We need to move, he said softly. They'll send more. Tharaka nodded. Then, we find somewhere stronger. He helped her up, gently lifting Leary in his arms. Tharaka grabbed what food remained, extra heat packs and the emergency med kit. Then they stepped out into the storm. Leaving the burning shelter behind, they didn't look back. Because what lay ahead was not just survival. It was revenge. It was freedom. It was the beginning of something new, and in Tharaka's heart, the cold was gone. Only fire remained. The sky above Outpost 9 cracked open like thunder. A massive black ship appeared through the clouds, wide and long like a moving shadow. It didn't carry trade goods. It didn't bring peace. It carried death and the man who owned Tharaka's past. Inside the ship, the warlord sat on a metal throne. His body was tall and covered in silver armor, his eyes glowing red with fury. His voice was calm but full of ice as he watched the reports. She's still alive, he growled. She dared escape. She dared keep the child. He turned to his officer. Send the message, he said, to every corner of the outpost, soon. Loudspeakers across the outpost buzzed with static. Then came the voice, deep, sharp. In many languages, the woman named Tharaka is property of the Vorak Syndicate. She has stolen a defective child and hidden with a human male. Return them now, or the entire outpost will burn. Jaren and Tharaka heard it from their hiding place beneath an old loading dock. Leary was wrapped in layers of heat blankets, sleeping in Tharaka's arms. Jaren leaned against the metal wall, hands tight around his rifle. He looked at Tharaka. That voice. That's him, isn't it? Tharaka nodded slowly. Vorak, the one who ordered Leary thrown into the cold. The one who said I was no longer useful. Jaren's jaw clenched. Now he threatens. A whole outpost just to take you back. Tharaka looked down at her child. He doesn't want me. He wants to make an example. If I can escape, others might try to. Jaren stood and paced. We can't hide forever, he said. Even if we run, he'll find us again. Tharaka didn't argue. She knew it was true. Then Jaren looked at the old comms unit he had carried with him from the shelter. The beacon he had activated earlier was still blinking. No answer, just a steady light. But then, something changed. A second light began blinking slowly, then faster. Jaren's eyes widened. Tharaka, he said. Someone answered the beacon. She stood quickly, holding Leary close. Who? I don't know, Jaren said, but the signal is human. Old military pattern, they must be far. But they're listening. For the first time since the warlord arrived, hope sparked again. Jaren adjusted the beacon, sending a location ping and a warning. This area is under threat from Vorak Syndicate. Human civilians in danger. Now, they needed to hold out, stay alive until help came. But the warlord wasn't waiting. He had already launched drones, troops, and walkers through the outpost. Shops burned, doors were kicked open, people were dragged into the snow. The message was clear: surrender, Tharaka, or suffer. Yet not a single voice answered. The people, though afraid, stayed silent. Maybe because they had seen her beg in the streets and been ignored. Maybe now they felt guilt. Or maybe they just feared Jaren's old rifle more than Vorak's ships. Jaren and Tharaka moved to a new hiding place in Old Repair Bay under the spaceport. It had thick walls, backup power, and one thing no one knew about, a hidden bunker. Once used by smugglers, Jaren opened the heavy door and led Tharaka and Leary inside. "This place can hold us a few days," he said, "but we need to do more than hide." He opened a rusted locker and pulled out an old combat suit he had worn. It years ago in a forgotten war. Now it felt heavy again, but right. Tharaka held the blaster and looked at Jaren in the suit. "You were a soldier." "I used to be," he said. "Now I guess I am again." Tharaka checked the ammo. Her hands steady. "I can fight too," she said. "I won't let him touch my child." They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a team, a shield, a pay. Blade outside. The warlord stepped onto the snow himself, his ship above him, his guards behind him. He raised his voice once more. "You have 1 hour," he shouted. 1 hour. "Or I will burn every wall, every child, every soul in this place, inside." The bunker. Jaren checked the clock. "Then we have 60 minutes to make this count." Tharaka kissed Leary's forehead. "Stay asleep, little one." She whispered, "Mama will be back soon." And for the first time in her life, she didn't run. She picked up her weapon and followed the human man into the light. To fight, to end this, to write a new story in blood and courage. The warlord had arrived, but so had a mother's fury, and behind her, a legend was waking up in the stars. The warlord soldiers marched through the snow with fire in their hands and steel in their boots. Smoke rose from shops and homes, and Outpost 9 turned from a quiet shadow into a battlefield. People hid. Behind locked doors, some prayed, others waited in silence, hoping it would end quickly, but under the old repair bay. Jaren and Tharaka were not hiding. They were preparing. Inside the hidden bunker, wires sparked, old machines hummed, and weapons long forgotten came back to life. Jaren stood in his Earth combat suit, adjusting the targeting system on his shoulder. Plate, it was scratched, dented, old, but it still worked. Tharaka strapped 2 blasters to her hips and tied back her white hair. She moved with purpose, silent and calm, like someone who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Leary slept quietly on a soft bed made from salvaged blankets. Her chest rising gently, her little hands wrapped around a small, plush Jaren had found in the wreckage. Tharaka looked at her child for one last time before stepping toward the hatch. "She's the only reason I kept breathing," she whispered. "Now she's the reason I fight." Jaren handed her a cum piece. "Keep this on, no matter what," he said. "We fight smart, not loud. Pick them off. Confuse them." She nodded, her eyes never blinking. "I don't need loud. I need them to fear." Above them, the Syndicate troops set up heavy weapons. Drones circled the area, and sensors swept every corner of the outpost. But they couldn't scan the bunker. It was lined with human stealth panels from an old war. The same war Jaren once fought in. The same war that left him with a code only a few remembered. He typed it into the console and smiled as an old message flashed back on the screen. "Tactical defense system active, outside." One of the warlord soldiers moved near a generator. Suddenly, it exploded beneath his feet, throwing him into the snow. Another tried to enter a warehouse. An old machine gun activated and fired a warning burst. The invader stopped, confused. This wasn't supposed to be hard. They were chasing a mother and a mechanic. Why? Did it feel like walking into a trap? Because it was. Tharaka moved like a ghost, slipping behind patrols, disabling sensors, and planting charges on supply lines. She didn't shoot unless she had to. But when she did, it was fast and final. She knew how they worked. She had seen them train, fight, punish, kill. Now she used that knowledge against them. Jaren attacked from the rooftops, using his suit to jump and land without sound. He planted noise decoys and laser traps, turning the outpost into a maze of confusion. Each time the syndicate regrouped, something else exploded. The warlord grew. Angry, he stepped out of his ship and shouted into the cold, "Face me, coward! Bring me the slave and the human who protects her." No answer, only the growing sound of distant gunfire and failing equipment. One of his officers approached. "Sir, they've triggered old Earth systems. We're losing control," the warlord growled, eyes glowing brighter. "Then I'll destroy everything," he roared. "Level the outpost, burn it all." Inside the bunker, Jaren heard the broadcast and looked at Tharaka. "He's desperate," he said. "That makes him dangerous." Tharaka grabbed her last charge and looked toward the surface. "Then let's end it now," she said. "Not tomorrow. Not after help comes now." Jaren opened the main tunnel hatch. And together they climbed into the heart of the outpost. Smoke filled the air, but their path was clear. They moved toward the Syndicate's control unit, hidden near the ships. Lower ramp, if they could destroy it, the drones and walkers would fall. It was guarded, but not enough, not against them. They fought like two storms, one cold and sharp, the other hot and silent. Jaren took the lead, his suit absorbing fire as he pushed forward. Tharaka moved in from the side, slicing through soldiers with precision and fury. They reached the control core and planted the charge. Jaren set the timer 60 seconds, no more. But the warlord landed in front of them, his body twice the size of Jaren's armor, glowing, blade in hand. "You could have run," he said to Tharaka. "You could have died quietly." Tharaka stepped forward, her eyes full of fire. "I'm not your property," she said. "I'm a mother." The warlord lunged, blade swinging. But Jaren blocked it, the force shaking his whole arm. Tharaka fired once to the knee, once to the shoulder, then a final shot to the faceplate. The warlord screamed, falling back, armor sparking. Jaren grabbed Tharaka and ran as the timer reached 0 BOOM. The control unit exploded, sending fire through the sky. Drones fell, ships powered down. Syndicate soldiers froze as systems crashed. They didn't stop running until they reached the bunker. Inside, Leary sat up, her eyes wide. "Mama." Tharaka dropped her weapon and pulled her child into her arms. "I'm here," she whispered. "It's over." Jaren sat down beside them, breathing hard but smiling. "They'll remember this night," he said, "and they'll remember who fought back." The Cold War was over, but something bigger was coming next. Something in the stars had heard their cry, and it was heading their way. Snow still fell from the dark sky, but it felt lighter now. The fires had died down. The streets of Outpost 9 were quiet again. Syndicate troops who survived the battle had already fled. Their ships broken, their leader defeated, their pride shattered. Inside the old repair bay, Jaren sat near a glowing heater, his armor scratched, his body sore. He looked around at the quiet room and took a slow breath. Tharaka sat nearby, holding Leary in her lap. The little girl's eyes were open, now bright and curious, her feet warm, her cheeks pink again. "She smiled at me," Tharaka whispered, almost not believing it, "after everything." She smiled. Jaren leaned forward and smiled too. "She's a fighter," he said. Just like her mother, they hadn't had time to rest, but their bodies had forced them to. Now, in the calm after the storm, they sat like survivors, not warriors. Then a soft beep broke the silence. Jaren turned to the old beacon on the table, still blinking. But now it wasn't blinking green. It was glowing blue. A new signal had arrived. Jaren picked it up slowly. Opened the message. He read the words twice before he looked at Tharaka. "It's them," he said. "Earth's command. They heard us." Tharaka's eyes widened. Is that real? They're sending a ship, Jaren said, voice shaking, one of the old ones, from the defense fleet. They're less than a day away. For a moment, there was no sound but the humming of the heater and the gentle breathing of the child. Then Tharaka whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Jaren nodded. "No," he said, "and maybe." We never were. Outside, locals had begun to emerge. Some stared at the broken syndicate machines. Others walked through the ashes of their homes. But their eyes turned toward the old repair bay, toward the place where a human man and a runaway mother had stood against a warlord. A few people gathered quietly, leaving boxes of food, clean blankets, and bandages at the door. No words were said, but their silence was louder than any apology. They had turned their faces away when Tharaka begged in the snow. Now they knew. They'd been wrong. That evening, Jaren stepped outside for air and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Stars, clear, open sky above, not hidden by smoke or war. He looked up at them and smiled softly. Tharaka joined him. Wrapping a warm shawl around her shoulders, she stood beside him, close, but not too close. "I don't know what comes next," she said. Jaren glanced at her and nodded. "Neither do I," he said, "but we're still breathing. And that's something." She smiled. Not the smile of someone rescued, but the smile of someone reborn. "I thought I was just meant to survive," she whispered, "but now I want to live." Jaren looked at her, and then at the small window where Leary sat playing with a spoon. "You're not just surviving anymore," he said. "You're building something." The next morning, the ground shook gently. Not from bombs or walkers, but from something bigger. A shadow passed over the outpost, long and wide. The Earth warship descended slowly from the clouds, its engines humming like thunder, wrapped in silence. It was old, armored, and beautiful, painted with the flag of Earth, the symbol of hope. It landed on the open plains just outside the city, and a ramp opened from its belly. People gathered to watch, eyes wide. Soldiers stepped out, human soldiers in clean uniforms, holding medpacks and tools, not weapons. One of them walked toward the repair bay, helmet off, gray streaks in his beard. "Name's Commander Haveth," he said, offering his hand to Jaren. "We got your signal." Jaren shook his hand. "You're late," he said, smiling. Haveth laughed softly. "First time in decades someone called us at all," he said, then looked at Tharaka and Leary. "We're here to help." They loaded supplies into the repair bay, helped repair the walls, and offered a place for Tharaka and Leary aboard the ship. But Tharaka looked around the small shelter and then at Jaren. "I think we'll stay," she said. Commander Haveth didn't argue. "Then we'll leave you a comlink and someone will check in," he said. He knelt in front of Leary, offering her a soft plush toy. She took it and smiled. And he smiled back. "She's the reason we fight," he said, gently. As the ship lifted back into the sky, Jaren and Tharaka stood side by side, watching the stars again, only this time they were no longer cold and far. They were full of promise, a human man, an alien woman, and a child who was once left to freeze now. They had each other, not as a debt, not as a deal, but as a family. And from that day forward, whenever the snow fell on Outpost 9, people remembered the night when fire met ice and a mother's love melted the cold.